Alrighty, hello everybody. We are Emily Sherlock and Carlos Salazar here talking about Chapter 6, Sexual Minority Students.
Thank you, Emily. We'll begin with the introduction of our chapter. So, chapter six pretty much explores the persistent stigmatization faced by the LGBTQ plus students regarding their sexual orientation. So, the chapter emphasizes the critical need for this population to receive consistent support and services. So, particularly through the efforts of school counselors and educators. The chapter also sh does show and discusses research on adolescents who are questioning their sexual orientation. So it shows the affirmation care and positive building relationships through trusted adults and counselors or teachers. And pretty much focusing on the experiences of higher self-esteem, improving quality of life, and fewer confusing or negative feelings about their identity. So, in our chapter, we came across some ongoing challenges for the LGBTQ plus students. So, despite growing awareness and societal progress, many LGBTQ students continue to face serious issues in educational settings. So, they still experience bullying, discrimination, social isolation, and violence. Pretty much in bullying, they face frequent verbal harassment, cyberbullying, and name calling, which leads to anxiety, depression, and school avoidance. They're discriminated against. There's a lot of bias from peers and sometimes school staff as well. So, for example, they are being misgendered or excluded from activities that can create hostile environments. There's also a lot of social isolation, fear of rejection. This forces students to hide their identity, and it leads them to feeling lonely and feeling like they don't have any support. So it's a lack of support. Um, it also gets violent, right? There's violence involved in all this as well. There's physical and sexual harassment, especially towards transgender students, and it remains a critical safety concern for a lot of the students in our schools. An urgent need for support that our chapter discussed and talked about was how transgender and gender nonconforming youth in schools um experience, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of bias and discrimination. And some alarming statistics show that 26% of transgender and gender nonconforming students reporting being physically assaulted due to their gender identity or expression, and even more, some experience verbal harassment, exclusion, or threats. There's a high impact on students because it increases their dropout rates and avoidance of school due to fear of trauma and also feeling invincible or unsafe in their learning environment. So this is important because our chapter discussed that every student deserves a school environment that is safe, respectful, and affirming, regardless of their gender identity. So in order for us to be able to create an inclusive support for marginalized students, the chapter discussed how ASCA recognizes that LGBTQ plus youth face unique challenges in schools due to systemic biases and social and societal marginalizations. So this can heighten the vulnerabilities of LGBTQ students and how they can also encounter mental health struggles, rejection, or lack of visibility. This can ultimately make schools unsafe, and it gives them a negative experience. So it's important for counselors to understand that they're called to action. So a good way to do so is by providing affirming and non-judgmental support, advocating for inclusive curricula, policies, and safe spaces, collaborating with families and staff to support students' well-being. And one key message about all this is to make sure that school counselors are ethically and professionally obligated to support, affirm, and advocate for all students, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression.
Oh, I skipped ahead. Oopsies. Okay, sorry. Technical issues on my side. So kind of talking about the different articles that were within the chapter. This was a chart that we saw that kind of demonstrates different school counselors who actively participated in sexual orientation education and training. So it kind of has like responses of different things, like if they read books, if they attended professional conferences, read journal articles. So, kind of just gaining additional information in how to help and assist and support LGBTQ youth, students, and just people on campus that need that support. So, it's kind of just going above and beyond just not what only what is expected on the school campus, but are you putting in the work to recognize what is going on in the outside world and maybe what is affecting them, not just in school, but policies and different things that are going on politically, and just kind of having that additional information that you can either just be aware of or even let students know if you know something that is going on within the world. It might be important if you're supporting them with something that you kind of know that information. One of the research participation things that they talked about was Safe Space. It's a training program created by the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. So it's a training program used for school counselors, I think in or everyone in education, just to kind of receive extra training because a lot of those school counselors that they kind of interviewed said that they felt unprepared to help and support LGBTQ students, and like they didn't know how to talk to them about their issues or things like that. And then the students themselves said that they use cues to figure out whether or not they could trust their counselor to be like a supportive person. So a lot of times they would use different conversations that they had with their counselor, or whether or not their counselor had supportive symbols, something like a safe zone sticker to determine what kind of support they will get. So I included at the bottom two examples of how you can kind of show your students that you are a supportive, safe space where they can talk to you and trust you with kind of a very personal thing that they want to share with you. And then another thing that we wanted to talk about was upholding the rights of LGBTQ plus students. So, in the ASCA ethical standards, it does emphasize that school counselors must affirm students' identities. So, regardless of our own personal biases, we want to affirm that students' identities are treated in a manner consistent with who they identify as for their gender. So, that includes the use of chosen names and pronouns. And we also want to emphasize that school counselors must protect students from harm. So, this means advocating for students to be free from any form of discipline, harassment, or discrimination related to their gender identity or gender expression. Sometimes this can mean, not only other students, but maybe other staff, and kind of reaffirming their gender identity and their preferred pronouns and names, even when it comes to teachers or other staff members. So, kind of what this means for counselors: actively challenging biased behavior or policies, promoting inclusive practices in classrooms and school policies, and collaborating with staff to create a safe and respectful school climate. I know a lot of times we talk about sometimes how it's hard to bring up topics like this to other staff or teachers or admin. So I feel like a way that you could kind of solve that is maybe having like an outside resource from the county that you're in to come in and talk about different bullying, discrimination, and, just all the different things from an outside perspective might just be a little bit easier to talk about because it's not you coming in as a counselor that they know to be like, hey, what you're doing is wrong. You're kind of just, it's more of an educational way to teach them, like, hey, this is how you should treat these students instead of, oh, you're wrong for not doing this, this, and that. So I think that's kind of important. So the promotion of safe schools, counselors play a critical role in supporting transgender and non-conforming youth by advocating for respectful and affirming practices. So again, this means using preferred names and pronouns, always address students by their name and pronouns what they identify with, and model that correct usage and gently correct others when needed. So if they say the wrong name or if they say the wrong pronouns, just say, oh, the pronouns are blah, blah, blah. So kind of just gently saying that just to kind of make sure that everyone is aware that that is what is supposed to be used, and then respect identity in school records. So making sure that preferred names and gender identity are reflected in unofficial documents, yearbooks, class lists, and awards. I know that obviously you can't change official records, but maybe a nickname section or different things like that can kind of reflect that student's gender identity. And then supporting restroom access is an important one. So allow students to use restrooms and locker rooms that align with their gender identity and advocate for access to gender neutral facilities where possible. I know that at my school site, we have a lot of staff restrooms that are gender neutral. So sometimes transgender students and gender nonconforming students will use those restrooms just to feel a little bit safer. So that's kind of a good way to make sure that they have access to that. And then additional actions, we can provide resources and referrals to LGBTQ plus affirming services, collaborate with families when appropriate to support the student's journey. Obviously, if the student does not want their family to know, then that is different than if a student has a very supportive family. Educate staff and students to foster a culture of inclusion and respect. So, kind of like I was saying, maybe using an outside source just to kind of bring in an education about LGBTQ youth and kind of what they go through and how to help them and support them in the best way we can. And then advocating for equity and affirmation. Every student deserves to feel safe, seen, and supportive. Despite progress, LGBTQ especially transgender and non-conforming students, still face alarming levels of marginalization, harassment, and isolation in schools. I feel like we can see this a lot now, especially with just the change of administration and kind of how things have been changing for a lot of these students. So the role of school counselors is absolutely critical, upholding ethical standards by affirming students' identities, advocating for inclusive policies that protect against discrimination, create a culture of belonging through education, awareness, and empathy, and providing safe spaces where students can express themselves without fear, especially if they don't have support at home or if you are the only like trusted adult that they have even told about kind of how they're feeling and you're the only person that they feel supported by, it's really important to make sure that they have that space to talk to you. And it's just kind of important to remember that, as a counselor, we're more than just support staff, we're agents of change. So we can transform school culture and ensure that all students, regardless of gender identity or expression, can thrive both academically and emotionally. So we want to make a culture in a school that's inclusive and diverse and equitable for all students. And so that's what's most important. And then these are our references from the textbook. And thank you.